Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for tuning in for this introductory class on the teachings of Bhagavad Gita as it is. Now, I am no expert in understanding the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, but I have the good fortune of having many great mentors who are very expert in this topic. So, according to the yoga tradition, we take guidance from those experts and in that way try to share those teachings according to our own realizations and with their blessings and with their guidance. So this verse that I'm going to talk about today is from the second chapter, which is called Contents of the Gita Summarized. And it's considered like an ABC verse which talks about the basis of spiritual understanding. Of course, the different topics in the Bhagavad Gita are really vast and initially a little hard to understand. I remember when I first started reading the Bhagavad Gita, I found it very difficult. But I found it a lot easier when I started associating with those who were practicing and strictly following the teachings of Bhagavad Gita as it is. So with all my shortcomings, please forgive me. I'm just trying to relay this information and make this knowledge available so that more people can come in contact with these wonderful teachings and we can make a more peaceful and happy situations for ourselves and for other people in the world. So traditionally, this particular translation of Bhagavad Gita as it is by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. This version is the most popular version of the Bhagavad Gita in the world, and it is the version that scholars and theologians use as their source of reference when it comes to understanding knowledge about the self, knowledge about the soul, and this ancient wisdom which is coming from India. So I'm going to read chapter 2, verse number 13. This is the Sanskrit. The Gita was originally spoken in Sanskrit by Lord Krishna. I hope this rain outside is not too loud. Please bear with me. So the Sanskrit reads, Dehinotsmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jana tita dihantara praptir dhyas tatra namuyati. Translation: as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, so the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. I'm using a teleprompter here, so please forgive me if it doesn't look like I'm looking at the screen, or if I make a few mistakes. Purport. Since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. This individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body, and since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering according to one's work in life. So Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least life in heavenly bodies for superior enjoyment of material existence. So in either case, there was no cause of lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul The supersoul and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira, or a most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies, and the Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the supreme cleavable or changeable, against the principle of the supreme souls being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gita, the fragmental portions of the supreme exist eternally, sanatana, and are called shara. That is, they have a tendency to fall down into material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, and even after liberation, the individual soul remains the same, fragmental. But once liberated, he lives an eternal life in bliss and knowledge with the personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the supersoul, who is present in each and every individual body and is known as the Paramatma. He is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon, and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. They are not on the same level, as it will be apparent in the beginning of the 4th chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna, and Krishna is not superior to Arjuna, then their relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. If both of them are deluded by the illusory energy, Maya, then there is no need of one being the instructor and the other being the instructed. Such instruction would be useless, because in the clutches of Maya no one can be an authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul deluded by Maya. Amagyana timirandasya girangina shalakaya chakshu unmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. So the topic of spirituality is a very vast and confusing topic for most of us. But I'll give an example. Just like when we go to school, when we go to university, when we go to college, we have to learn our topic from a teacher. So similarly, it's no different with the topic of spiritual life. In actuality, the handbook of life is very, very important, because just we go to school and we learn so many different topics, but the topic of the self, the topic of our real nature, the topic of how to conduct ourselves in life, that should also be taught. Therefore, with spiritual life, one should also have a teacher. And as is the situation of Arjuna here with Krishna, Krishna is acting as Arjuna's teacher and trying to enlighten him in the knowledge of the difference between the body and the soul. So I'll give a simple example that we've seen, through the changes of our body, that we've had many changes of body. Once we had a child's body, a young person's body, and we're getting an older body. But we can also observe that we haven't become a different person by the changes of our body. Okay, sure, we can express ourselves differently with the particular type of body we have, but intrinsically we're still the same person we were when we were a child, for example. So the qualities of the soul, which Krishna talks about, one is that the soul is eternal. Eternal means that when the body dies, the soul continues to live on. And we are that individual spiritual soul, which is described here in this particular verse. We are that personality that's existing when the body ceases to exist. Now we can tell that the soul is present in the body because the body is animated. And just like, you may have seen a dead body. What's the situation of the dead body? It's very unattractive. It has little value to us, and we just want to pretty much get rid of it. That's because the spirit soul, the spark, has left the body. It is the spirit soul that is the attractive feature within the body and that makes the body animated. Krishna says, Na tvevaham jutu na sam, na tvam nema janadipa, na cheva na bhavisyama, sabhavaya mataparam. He said to Arjuna, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So here he's explaining the eternal nature of the spirit soul. That the soul's not withered by the wind, it's not moistened by water, it's not slain when the body is slain. Krishna will go on to describe the nature of the soul in further verses in this particular chapter. So Arjuna was in a pretty perilous position because a great war was about to take place, and Krishna was asking Arjuna to actually fight against his cousin brothers, his relatives. They were the ones who he'd spent his childhood with, learning the art of being a warrior. So you can imagine he was somewhat concerned and somewhat attached, very attached, to his cousin brothers, his relatives, his uncles, etc., his grandfather. This war that was about to take place, it was a war between two cousin brothers. On one side, there were the Pandavas, who were virtuous, pious, upstanding young men. They knew the principles of religiosity, and they were perfect examples in society. On the other side were the Kauravas, their cousin brothers. But the Kauravas were very motivated. They wanted to usurp and cheat their cousin brothers out of the share of their share of the kingdom. They wanted to trick them. They wanted to, by unfair means, they wanted to gain the kingdom that was rightfully the property of the Pandavas. Now there'd been all sorts of different means and ways of diplomacy employed beforehand to try to get the Kauravas to come to a reasonable resolution so that there wasn't a need for war. But everything had failed. So therefore Krishna, appearing as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, decided the only way was for them, the Kauravas, to be liberated from their material bodies. Now, you might say that, well, that's pretty rough, that Krishna is sanctioning war and sanctioning death and things like that. But Krishna, being the Supreme Personality himself, he wanted to instruct Arjuna and he wanted to instruct us in understanding the difference between the body and the soul. Now, of course, if the Lord comes and he personally kills you, then your destination is quite glorious as a spirit soul, which was mentioned in this particular verse, that Bhishma and Drona, they were going to obtain spiritual bodies in heavenly planets. Bhagavad Gita is a philosophical treatise. it's not a mythical book of instructions. It's actually a conversation which took place, and it's of historical importance. You can actually go today to Kurukshetra, the place where the battle took place. Arjuna was very bewildered. He said, Kapanyadosho pahata svabhavha prachami tvam dhamma samuda cheta yakshre hitam nishitam bruhitam me shishyashtiham svari mam tvam prapanam. He said, now I'm confused about my duty and have lost all composure due to miserly weakness. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. This knowledge of the difference between the soul and the body is considered like the ABC of spiritual knowledge. Because you can imagine, if you're just identifying as your body, thinking yourself to be Australian or American or Indian or English or Russian or Chinese, then what would be the point of having some kind of spiritual practice or spiritual destination if you thought that, you know, life is just what it is, and then when the body dies, that's all there is to it? But intelligently, why would we undergo so much trial and tribulation? Why would we undergo so much experience just for it all to cease to exist at the time of death? These are some of the questions that people have pondered, you know, since time immemorial. Through many of the other scriptures of the world, we get some basic training in different moral codes and ethics. For example, in the Bible, we get the 10 Commandments, which are basic introductions to living. Don't be a thief, don't rape, don't kill. In any normal person's mind, these are basic principles of life. But just as there are different grades of mathematics and different grades of topics and advanced topics, so similarly, so far as spirituality is concerned, there are different levels and different rungs on the yoga ladder. Meaning, as we progress through life, different knowledge becomes available to us in order to keep progressing in our spiritual journey. And this Bhagavad Gita is a little more advanced knowledge about the nature of ourself and the Supreme Lord. Here we find out that the Supreme Lord is actually a person. I remembered when I had my Sunday school, and I went to Sunday school as a child. We heard many teachings from the Bible, and there was always talk about the Father and God. God is this, the Father is this, etc., etc. And I remember as a child thinking, well, who is that Father? Who is that person? And, you know, I saw pictures of, you know, God having, you know, long hair and being up on the cloud and reaching out there and throwing lightning bolts and all sorts of stuff like that. But I was always hungry to find out who that person was. I was always wondering, who is God? God must be a person. But of course, you know, as I grew older, I came across many different philosophies. A philosophy of oneness, which is mentioned here in this particular verse. So there were some conflicts with me trying to understand how everything fits together. But what you will find in Bhagavad Gita is this explanation of the yoga ladder. That many of these different philosophies that we understand or that we come into contact with many are different rungs on the yoga ladder, meaning we progress slowly up the ladder until we reach the top of the ladder. So it's not that they don't have their value or that they are useless, but they're stepping stones towards us understanding more advanced topics. Just like we had to learn 1 + 1 = 2 before we could go on to do things like algebra and logarithms and things like that. Enlightenment means that we see things just like we would turn on a light inside a dark room. When the light's off in the room, we fumble around and we can't find anything. We're always in anxiety, bumping into things, tripping over. But as soon as you find the light switch, everything becomes very easy to see and very easy to understand. So for this very purpose, Lord Krishna spoke to Arjuna in order to enlighten him how to solve these problems of social disturbances and ignorance. So, a lot of points were covered today, and I only touched on a couple of them. But suffice to say, I hope it's enough to interest you to want to hear a little bit more about the Bhagavad Gita and about Lord Krishna's discussion with Arjuna. I certainly found as a younger man that even though I found it hard to understand, well, practically impossible to understand the Bhagavad Gita when I first read it, when I started hearing from those people who were practicing the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, things became very easy for me to understand. And I found throughout the course of my life, in the last 30 years or so, that my life has become very auspicious through taking shelter of these teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, and that I've become a lot more peaceful and a lot happier. So the proof is always in the pudding, but you have to try it for yourself. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all very much for tuning in today. I don't want to go on too long, but just suffice to say enough to give you a little bit of understanding of one of the key verses of the Bhagavad Gita. If there's any further interest in these teachings and this topic, then I'll continue to do more classes and speak on these different verses according to my understanding, and try to relay the information given by the great teachers and saints who've gone before us since time immemorial. It's not something that's just come about in the last couple of 100 years, but Bhagavad Gita has been existent in society for a very, very long time. Please feel free to contact me through any form of social media, or if you know me in person, approach me. I have copies of Bhagavad Gita available and can arrange for those books to be sent to you, no matter where you are in different parts of the local area or in different parts of the world. Thank you very much for tuning in, and until we meet again.